Again, we will call the meeting to order for Administration and Education Finance Committee. Roll call, please.
Okay, Mr. Appel? Mr. Appel is present. Dr. Armstrong? Dr. Armstrong is present. Mr. Birkin?
Here.
Mr. Birkin is present. Mr. Castile? Mr. Castile is present. Ms. Champagne?
Here.
Ms. Champagne is present. Dr. Clark? Here. Dr. Clark is present. Mr. Harris? Here. Mr. Harris is present. Mr. Hollis? Here. Mr. Hollis is present. Ms. Holloway? Here. Ms. Holloway is present. Ms. Mellorine? Here. Ms. Mellorine is present. Mr. Morris?
Here.
Mr. Morris is present. You have a quorum.
Thank you. First item, please.
Your consent agenda is ready for approval, adding items 4.1 and 6.1.
A motion to approve the consent agenda. All right. A second? Second, Mr. Appel. Any objections? All right, next motion, please.
Your first item is on page 41, item 4.2, consideration of LDOE contracts greater than $50,000. The recommendation is to approve.
I see a motion to approve the contracts greater than $50,000 by Ms. Champagne. Second. Mr. Harris. Any objections? Seeing none, motion passes. Next.
On page 81, item 4.3, consideration of LDOE contract regarding administration and management of an education savings account program. Recommendation is to approve.
Motion for consideration of the contract, ESA contract. Ms. Champagne. Second, Ms. Mellorine. So we have a
Birkin.
presentation.
Yes, sir, Mr. Birkin. As Mr. Bradford and Ms. Sino make their way to the table, I just want to make everyone aware that we had a process for the selection of this particular management group to help operate the Gator Scholarship Program. And I want to thank Board President Morris for appointing Mr. Birkin, Ms. Mellorine, and Dr. Armstrong to be a part of that committee. Want the board to know that we had content experts from the department that were also a part of that committee. And a third state agency, the Office of Technology Services, was also represented on that committee. So this recommendation today really is the function of three various state agencies overviewing submissions and making a recommendation to you today. At this time, I would open up for Mr. Bradford and Ms. Sino to provide a summary of the process and provide any additional information that you might request.
Thank you, Dr. Brumley. Ken Bradford, Chief of Staff here at Louisiana Department of Education. I'll begin by just outlining the process and the timeline that has occurred. Beginning in March and April, department staff began reviewing other states that had ESA program administrators and platforms that would be able to generate student enrollments, payments, et cetera, for an ESA program. We then developed a draft RFI, a request for information, so that we could have vendors propose to us different systems that we would take a look at should this get signed into legislation and ESAs be enacted in law. In May and June, we then worked with the Office of State Procurement. We followed the State Procurement Code for a request for information because we wanted to have one that aligned with all of the state policies and statutes. The legislation that was passed, which became Act 1, stated that the department would contract with a vendor, and that such a contract would have to come to Bessie for approval, and then it would have to go to joint budget for approval. In June, item 4.6 on the admin and finance agenda, I came to you and I presented the RFI. It was an 11-page RFI. It outlined within that RFI the different components that we would be looking for within a program management system. As Dr. Brumley alluded to, there was a 10-person review panel that was identified. 3 Bessie members, 6 members of the Department of Education, including the Chief of Staff, an RFI coordinator, representative from our operations office, Ms. Ciano, our Deputy Superintendent for Finance, Thomas Lambert, our Assessment and Accountability Office, our Executive Counsel. Then we had the Office of Technology Services represented it for the data, the security, and all of the things relative to the online components that we knew eventually the Department of Administration and OTS would have to approve. That RFI, subsequent to the meeting, went live on June 20th. On June 24th, we shared with the board, we shared with you that it had gone live. On June 25th and June 26th, we had internal meetings to talk about the logistics, timelines, when would be able to review the RFIs that we received, when would be able to meet. And we also outlined what the state procurement code required as part of an RFI. June 27th, pursuant to the RFI, was a deadline for receipt of questions. So any vendors that wanted to ask questions of the department and get clarification for what we were seeking had to be in by June 27th. We had to have a response to them by July 2nd. So on July 3rd, the 30 questions that we had received, we provided answers to, and those were posted on the state procurement website on July 3rd. On July 8th was the deadline for us to receive responses. We received 4 responses, 4 vendor responses. On July 9th, the 10 people that participated in the review, we received a summary of the 4 entities that had applied. We received training on a rubric whereby we would score those applications that was based on the RFI that you approved at the June Bessie meeting. From July 9th to July 15th, the 10 reviewers did preliminary scoring, and they looked at all 4 of the vendor applications that came in. On July 16th, we had about a 12-hour day here at the Department of Education, and the 4 vendors came in individually and met with the 10-person review panel. We clarified questions we might have had from the RFI and any questions that they may have for us. We had dialogue. That lasted about a 12-hour day with the 4 of those. On July 18th, we had another meeting with the 10 reviewers. We ensured that all of the scoring was accurate and that there was consensus on the final scores. Odyssey was the entity that had the highest scores. 9 of the 10 members of the review committee had scored them the highest. And then on July 22nd, Ms. Ciano began contract negotiations with Odyssey so that we would be able to come to you today with a recommendation and seek your approval to move forward with a contract for them. I'll pause there, as that was the process that I wanted to share with you that the department has gone through. See if there's any questions, and then we'll let Beth elaborate if anything I missed.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Bradford, you mentioned that 9 of 10 members recognized Odyssey as the highest performer. Can you help us appreciate the gap between number 1 and number 2?
Yes. So the winning proposal, which we saw was Odyssey, earned approximately 87% of total available points that were available in the process, and the next closest was 80. So there was a 7% gap. It was significant, and it was clear which of the vendor providers had scored the highest and had done met the requirements of the RFI.
Any other questions, comments from the board? Yes, Dr. Armstrong.
Having served on that committee, I'm going to say that it was very thorough. We received packets of the written proposals in advance, looked through all of that, studied those, prepared our interview questions, and then, like Mr. Bradford said, we spent a long time interviewing and talking to all of the vendors that came forward, and listened to their questions. We responded, they answered our questions. So I felt it was a very thorough process, and appreciate your facilitation for all of this.
Thank you, Dr. Armstrong. Anyone else?
Yes, Mr. Perkins, I'm sorry. I'm inquiring about the rubrics. Supposedly, the rubric was sent to certain members. I'm not quite sure, but I didn't receive it. Did y'all send a rubrics of how you determined this, Mr. Bradford?
Sure. So just to go back, the RFI, pages 9 and 10 of the RFI outlined the key components that we were going to be looking for. I do believe the board was provided a summary document of the rubric. As the RFI included 5 domains: preferred vendor experience, corporate background experience, a business model for contracting services, the approach and methodology, and the implementation timeframe of the solution. Those were the components of the RFI. The rubric scored against those components. I believe the board had received an update on the rubric.
Ms. Holloway, I sent that yesterday. What I'll do is
I
I'll go.
did not receive anything.
Okay, I'll
Dr.
go in
Brown.
and check on that. I'll go
Nor
check
did,
that.
well, I'm just going to speak for myself. We did
Okay.
not receive the rubric.
Okay, I'll go check, Ms. Holloway.
Yes, Mr. Castillo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bradford and committee, I was not a part of the selection process of the committee, but I've gotten some notes here and there about the vendor odyssey and challenges that we have experienced in other states. Did the committee take into consideration any other possible issues or concerns that have been raised in other states around the country?
Speak to a couple things. There were 4 vendors that provided. Each vendor has some level of operation in other states. This particular vendor, which is in Missouri, Idaho, and Iowa, administers $240 million worth of funds that are dispensed annually. And so we actually had not only did they come here and when we heard and we had done a historical review of where they've been and what they've done since 2021, but we also spoke with Missouri Department of Education, who has worked with them to administer their program. Beth can speak to that, as well as representatives are here today from Odyssey, should any questions want to be asked of them.
Right. Ms. Sino, you can speak to your conversation with Missouri?
It actually was Iowa, sorry.
Iowa,
It was
okay.
Iowa, yes, and I did speak to them. It was a team of 2 individuals who had been intimately involved in standing up the Iowa system. They had nothing but good to say about this vendor. I think they're very satisfied with their performance. Their program is growing, and so they intend to keep them on board. It was a very pleasant experience discussing that with them, and I felt really comfortable and just validated our selection of the vendor after the conversation.
What about Idaho? Any comments or conversations with the state of Idaho?
I did not call Idaho.
That's all I have. Thank you.
I have, I'm sorry. Mr. Perkins?
That's it, yes.
Sorry. Mr. Perkins? I'd like to follow up with Mr. Castillo's questions in regards to, I guess, the research and identifying these different states that have used Odyssey. And I don't know if I'm receiving inadequate information or not, but I need clarification with Iowa. From what I understand, that they are looking at another vendor, a new vendor. Idaho, I've gotten information, they're choosing not to renew the contract with Odyssey. And then there's Missouri encountering similar problems. And within all these, there's just a history of concerns with this particular vendor. Is this something that you've dug into? I mean, there are news articles I've read several. There have been several.
Certainly. So I think, Ms. Holloway, rather than me speak on behalf of the particular vendor, I'd ask at this time that the representative
Perfect.
Odyssey come down.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Make sure the mic is on. State your name and company, please.
Joseph Connor. I'm the CEO of Odyssey. So in response to your statement, in Iowa, we are in the middle of a full 6-year contract. There have been no discussions about rebidding it. It is the third largest education savings account program in the country. It's also the fastest growing one. It's now over 30,000 students. And I think based on what the department represented, the state is very happy with our administration of it. With regards to Idaho, there we run a program that has distributed $80 million to over 78,000 students for more than 2 years. That program has received a good, clean bill of health in an independent third-party audit. It found that 99.99% of all purchases were eligible, one of the best records in the entire country. And then furthermore, in Missouri, the department there, which is the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, has extended the contract for an additional year. So all of them are current clients and remain so.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Connor? Thank you, sir.
I'd just like
Mr.
to know
Appel.
if there's any litigation pending or active against your company related to your contracts?
No, there is not.
During this process, I might say that, and at the end of that long day of interviews, whenever Odyssey came out first, they went to the extra step, which was basically not in the plan, for Ms. Siono to call other states and to inquire about it, which I thought was a very good extra part, just to see what they, and to get a glowing report only validated the idea that they did come out first for us, in my mind, anyway. So I was also completely comfortable with the process. It was very detailed. It was upfront. Everyone knew what was going on from the beginning, as far as this committee was concerned. And I just give kudos to Mr. Bradford and Ms. Beth for all of their work in this. And that's all I have. Anything from anyone else?
Yeah.
Mr. Hollis?
If you would, and I forgot your name.
Joseph Connor.
Oh, okay, Mr. Connor, just speak a little bit about, as I appreciate, Idaho, was that something that you guys just lost, or can you speak to that, please?
Sure. So we have administered the Idaho Empowering Parents program since August of 2022. And as of right now, are in negotiations with the State Board of Education for a 3-year contract extension. In fact, I just had a conversation this morning with them about that.
Okay, and if you would, share, how long have y'all been in this kind of work?
Absolutely. So we were founded in 2021. And since then, we've grown to 3 states, as the Department of Education representatives have stated, and we have over 100,000 students on the platform, receiving close to $400 million in grant funding across these programs.
In the middle of any contract, do you have a situation where a state might want to upend the program, and if so, could you expand on that?
So typically, each state will contract with us for their kind of standard term of years. And we usually have renewal contract discussions at the end of that period. And so in the case of, for example, Idaho, there was actually a difference in the law. They expanded it from having 2 years to spend down the Empowering Parents program to 3 years. And so some of the discussions have been about essentially extending it through that period for additional 3-year term.
Okay, I appreciate your answers. Thank you.
Ms. Holloway?
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Connor, for answering the questions. I need some clarifications on articles, as you know, that have been written. Can you clarify possible issues that they're claiming Odyssey had, whether it's materials inappropriately or red flags, they call it? Any issues like with Idaho that they're claiming?
Absolutely, happy to address that. So,
I mean, I don't want to.
oh, I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead. I just didn't want to.
Okay. So in the Idaho Empowering Parents program, in the first year of administration, there were concerns raised about whether or not the funds were being used for their intended purpose, which was for eligible education expenses, things like electronic hardware, software, books, et cetera. So in consultation actually with the Idaho state government, we utilized the services of an independent third-party auditor who returned an audit in the fourth quarter of 2023 that showed that 99.99% of all purchases up until that point had been for eligible educational expenses. So one of the best records for that program in the country. And we actually had been hired in Idaho in part because one of the previous vendors there who was administering a program called the Strong Family, Strong Students program had up to 7% of purchases that they actually weren't able to attach to an educational item. And so the governor and the rest of the state government was very happy with that outcome, and that put to bed essentially those concerns over whether or not eligible items were being purchased or not.
Okay, thank you. And I have another question. Mr. Perkins, I'm not sure who will answer this with the contract, 11 million plus, and the state appropriated 9 million. Can you talk about the 9 million the state appropriated? Am I right?
Ms. Siano?
Ms. Siano?
Yes, Beth Sienna with the department. There was no $9 million appropriation yet for the operation, for the students or for the accounts. That is yet to be determined. This year, we were only appropriated about $1.8 million to begin the implementation of the system and hiring staff, inclusive of like marketing and things along with the electronic system, basically all the components to run such a system. But there was no $9 million appropriation.
Yeah, I think possibly it's the, maybe the miscommunication from the voucher system rolling over. So, okay, just wanted it clarified.
Yeah.
And so it's going to cost this company, Odyssey, 11 million plus to operate for 3 years.
No, I want to clarify what the contract that we need to be under has two components. The first one is a flat fee that we will owe the company, like to stand up the system and to get everything operational. That is about $350,000. The pricing of actually administering the accounts is on a per-account basis. So that $11 million in this contract is not a firm amount. It is an up-to amount that is commonly used in contracting terms. They will actually, once the funds are appropriated to actually operate the system, and we have live accounts, then the legislature will need to appropriate funds to fill those accounts. And they will then invoice us at certain times of the year where we actually have data that supports how many accounts they're administering. The billing will be based on that times $143 per account that they administer. So we have set up terms, that will allow for this appropriate invoicing, where we'll clarify, we'll have data to support that. But we wanted to set up the contract in a 3-year term, which is very customary in state government, and make sure that whatever was finally decided about the program, that we had the capacity in a system and a vendor that we could accommodate should the legislature and Bessie decide to expand the program to a certain level.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had two questions for Odyssey. The first one is relative to the timeline. So it's a really aggressive timeline. My understanding is that we have to be online for March of ~25. I just wanted to get some feedback from you with regard to executing that timeline. You feel comfortable with that? And help us to get comfortable with that.
Absolutely. Yes, we do feel comfortable in hitting that timeline. Our experience across our programs has been on average, about 55 days for implementation from contract signature to actually standing up the platform. In Iowa, which was raised earlier, we had less than that. We did it in 53 days. So the fact that we're moving forward here in early fall with a start date of March makes me highly confident that we will be able to do it based on our track record. And I'd also just say that actually historically, kind of nationwide, typically these programs have very short windows from when the legislature passes it, the agency hires someone to implement it. Typically, you might get at most 3 months. So I think just also looking kind of broadly at the fact that we have several months until March puts Odyssey and the Department of Education in an excellent place to make sure it launches on time in early March.
Great, thank you. Just one other question. What should we expect with regard to frequency of stewardship? There's going to be a lot of attention on this one, how those dollars are being allocated, how efficiently, and so forth. So what should we expect as a board with regard to frequency of stewardship of those dollars and how well the system is working?
So could you clarify your question a little bit? Do you mean where the funds are going to be spent, or?
Just helping this board to appreciate, and the public, to appreciate, how well the program is running. I don't know what kind of metrics you guys are going to be bringing us. I'm sure you have all that already for other states. So I'm just curious, early on, obviously, we would expect more frequent stewardship once the program gets established, people build confidence in it and whatnot. Maybe that frequency gets extended. But I'm interested in initially, at what frequency we would expect to hear about status of implementation, how things are going, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. So as part of our agreement with the department, we are providing them access to administrative login to the Odyssey system that will enable them to see many of these features happen in real time. For example, they actually will be able to see applications coming in. So some of the metrics that are important that we'll be tracking is total number of student applicants, as well as what percentage of those have been verified. Then we would also look at what percentage of those who have been verified and awarded are actually utilizing the scholarship. And then in addition to that, we would track how long it would take someone to essentially go through that process from starting an application to filling it in to actually getting a determination back from us. All of those are kind of key metrics that will show the health of the program. In addition to that, we do monitor on a daily basis and provide it typically on a weekly or monthly basis to many of our clients at the state level what the customer satisfaction level is. So as part of our operations of the Gator program, we will have a customer support team, and they will essentially be taking surveys of the people who call in, and then we'll actually be able to relay that back to the department. In addition to that, we also are capable and typically do a kind of annual survey of the parents and students who are utilizing the program to indicate whether or not they're happy with the system.
So that helps me a lot with level of detail you guys are going to provide. So if the system goes live in March, when would you expect us to get an update on progress for implementation?
So in terms of the very first part of it that is going live and we'd have actionable data, that would be on the application and identity verification piece. As I indicated, we will provide access to the department so that they can actually see those numbers as they come in live. We call it access to real-time data. So they would theoretically be able to update you on that same day with, hey, in the first 24 hours, this is how many applications we received. Here's how many have been approved.
Got it. Thank you for that. I can see I need to redirect my question because you guys are going to be stewarding to us, not Odyssey, right? Okay, so apologize for that. Can you help me out with that, Ms. Yano?
Right. I am very excited because we only have 2 staff to administer the program here in the department. Of the capabilities of this system and the statistics, I love statistics. We'll be able to provide it to you on intervals. I think we don't have quite the cadence down yet. But we will definitely have the availability of statistics to provide to you at whatever interval is desired based on the statistics available. But those reports, that will be part of my team has one position and school choice has a position, and we'll split up between who's going to be monitoring those statistics probably on a daily basis so that we can make sure that things are running smoothly. We have to obviously in my office check the flow of the money, So yes, I'm very comfortable with the statistics they'll be able to present to us.
Okay, appreciate any insight you guys can give us with regard to expectations for what that reporting frequency is going to look like. So we can respond to our constituents, right? How well the system is running, how often we get that feedback and so forth.
Absolutely, yes,
Thank you.
sir.
Ms. Holloway?
Thank you. Mr. Connor, can you restate the states that you definitely have a contract with from now until 2-3 years from now? Who are they?
So we have contracts with the Idaho State Board of Education for the administration of the Empowering Parents Grant Program. We have a contract with the Missouri Department of Elementary and Secondary Education for administration of the Close the Gap program. And we have a contract with the Iowa Department of Education for administration of the Students First Education Savings Account program.
And it's ongoing.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Hollis?
Just a couple other questions, Mr. Connor. If you don't mind, share with me, like, the size of your business. I mean, it sounds like y'all are, I don't want to say a startup, you've been around now for 3 years, but staffing, I ask because compared to the states that you've mentioned, they're small and compared to Louisiana. So if you would, just give me comfort that y'all are going to be appropriately staffed. I would hate to have one of these situations where mid-year, at some point, the contract needs to be upended, the lack of the efficiencies, the negatives that go along with that. And so in my desire to try to avoid that, please give me some comfort to staffing, and if you would speak to that, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. So we, as a company, have raised over $16 million from investors in terms of being able to actually build out and hire the team and the platform. We have committed, as part of the Louisiana RFI submission that we sent to the department, to hire a state-specific customer support team that we would hire over the next several months in advance of the March launch. Right now, we have a team that is around 35-plus individuals. One of, I think, the hallmarks and differentiators of the Odyssey platform is the fact that we utilize technology to improve the efficiency of these programs. So we are able to actually have the department have a very lean staff when they are administering these programs. Our partners in the Iowa Department of Education have one full-time employee actually who is essentially administering that program. And many of those reasons are because the fact that we can actually use technology to automate highly manual work such as identity verification and other aspects.
Okay. And then let me also ask you, I mean, it sounds like it's a fairly exclusive thing what these various entities are doing as far as managing this. As it pertains to the states that you all do business in now, specifically to ESAs, as I appreciate it, there's one state that you guys sort that for them. Is that correct, or am I not understanding that?
So right now, we administer, as I said, 3 programs.
But specifically to ESAs, that's what I'm asking you about. Is it just one?
Right. So we have, in Iowa, we run the Iowa Students First Education Savings Account program.
Okay.
This year, that's about 30,000 students and more than $225 million. And then depending on who you would ask, the 2 other programs will either be categorized as supplemental education savings account programs, so programs that are for all expenses except for school tuition, or alternatively, some people refer to those as micro grants.
Okay. Do you have any anticipation that you guys are going to expand into other states? And the only reason that I ask that is I just hate to see a fairly new entity out there getting spread thin. You know, if this is going to be signed and we're going to be off and running, I just want to have every assurance that the appropriate focus is going to be given to Louisiana.
Absolutely. And so as part of our submission in the RFI, we did indicate that there is a Louisiana-specific team that will be working on this project. We do have a head of implementation who has come down here several times and has already met with the department on a weekly basis. We'll continue to do that moving forward. We are hiring a Louisiana-specific customer support team that will be overseen by some of our existing managers. So we do have the capacity, certainly, to handle the program.
Okay. And then one last question, if you don't mind. Would you share with me, say, a batting average of the presentations that you've made across the nation? How you guys looking as it pertains to that? If you don't mind sharing that information with me.
I'm sorry, could you clarify?
A
what you
batting
mean by
average,
that?
you make a presentation in X number of states, are you signing up half of them, a third of them, a quarter of them? And again, I'm asking if you don't mind sharing that. I'm just curious to know what other states, you know, the experience that y'all have had up until this point.
Right. So I think over the last year, we probably have pitched to a number of different governmental entities, also nonprofits and a few for-profits. Of those, I would imagine that we probably have maybe a final close rate of somewhere around 25% of those who choose to work with us.
Okay. And then a state of, 4.65 million people, it's basically, you know, 40% larger than the state that y'all handle the ESAs. I'm just asking a simple question. Do you have every confidence that y'all are going to be able to handle this without, small hiccups are just a part of things. I expect that. But without any major hiccups, you have all the confidence in the world you'll be able to pull this off well?
Yes. We in Iowa now run, it's the third largest education savings account program. As I indicated, we have 53 days to stand up that system from contract signature to launch. In those 30 days that we had open, we processed over 30,000 applications, approved 19,000, ultimately enrolled approximately 17,000. We then nearly doubled those numbers for this year. So we absolutely have the capacity to handle and do currently administer some of the largest programs in the country successfully.
Okay, very good. I appreciate you being here today and also answering these questions. That concludes my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hollis. Anyone else? We have two cards wish to speak on the subject. Michael Falk, Louisiana Association of School Superintendents, and if I can read this correctly, Kahunda Conley? Is that? Corley, sorry. Welcome, and Mr. Falk, would you like to begin, or Ms. Corley?
Michael Falk, Executive Director of the Louisiana Association of School Superintendents, and speaking regarding this item, I was very actively involved with the legislative session that as we went through all the processes and stuff, and especially with the funding. And it was approved that the LDOE may enter into a contract for program administration, that Bessie has to approve that contract and is subject to funding approval by the Joint Legislative Committee. The fiscal notes in Act 1, which was Senate Bill 313 of the Education Savings Account, did provide that funding for the first year to gear up the program. We're looking at $11,262,000. When you first look at the agenda and you look at that item on the agenda, there are no attachments. For that reason, I made a public records request to look at the procurement procedure, the criteria, the rubric for scoring, and all that. Mr. Bradford submitted the report that would answer all those questions I have, and I would hope to receive that report so that I can answer the questions from my group. It appears an extensive process was used, that Bessie members were involved, and in light of the issue of transparency, I felt I needed to ask for the public records request, and I believe those would answer the questions that I had raised. So, for that reason, I wanted to make my comments today, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Any response, any questions? Okay. Ms. Corley?
Good morning. My name is Karonda Corley. I am a proud parent and global disabilities advocate. This is my son sitting to the right of me. His name is Corinth Corley. He is a proud self-advocate in the making. I am sitting here today, I'm supposed to have 5 minutes, sir. I'm speaking on behalf of an organization. I am sitting here today on behalf of Louisiana families of individuals with living with disabilities, or should I say, overcoming oppression, living with disabilities in this state of Louisiana. Our children, this is what ESAs are about. It is about children like my son, who is sitting to my right, who is not being afforded a free, appropriate public education as it relates to our school systems in this state. Some of the questions that we had during the legislative session as it related to this issue was, number one, was the money going to end up touching the family's hand? And if this was something that the families would have to actually file as it relates to their taxes? That was something that the legislators could not answer, and that is something that I would ask all of our BESI board members to actually ask LDOE and ask Odyssey. In addition to that, we look at Arizona, which is supposed to be the model for the nation, that has been an epic fail as it relates to Educational Savings Acts. It has heavily defunded our traditional public schools as well as the charters. And I think that that is a problem, especially if we have more money allocated towards new charters to come into existence this year. Third, what exactly is the process going to look like as it relates to families of children with disabilities that are English language learners? I did not hear anything about that, including how we're going to roll that information out. We do know that this state does not have broadband in every area of this state. And so making sure that every family that have a child with a disability can receive access to that system is pertinent. And that is something that is very problematic, as you know. Our vice president, who's currently in the running and shall become our 47th president, has come to Louisiana, in fact, to Eunice, to talk about the lack of access to internet capabilities. Last but definitely not least, I would like to make sure that we actually have a conflict resolution process as it relates to educational savings accounts, because as you know, a lot of our school systems, they always take the money, but they always send our children back after the federal cutoff date of September 1st and February 1st back into the traditional public school systems where the money doesn't follow the child like it's supposed to. And so I would like to make sure that the money actually follow the child. As they stated during the legislative session, they said that these educational savings money, that if the parents does not utilize all the money and the child go back into the traditional public school system, that money is supposed to go back with them. And so I want to ensure that that is a very open book into the Louisiana open wallet, and that we are able to see that money go back to the traditional public school system along with that child and all of the services and supports that they need. And so if you should have any questions, comments, or concern, my child and I, we are very much open and ready to answer any questions that you may have. And of course, Mr. Mike Falk, I'm sure, would sign on to it, along with Janie Pope and Danny Garrett, who I don't see in here, with the School Board Association, because they know that I am very much aware and very much informed, but I am very vocal as it relates to our families and children with disabilities. And our state have over 1/4 of the population that is children with disabilities that would be utilizing this system. I yield the remaining of my time and ask to hold it to the next one.
Thank you, Ms. Corley. Any questions?
And I'm going to address this to Ms. Cieno, because again, I just want to make sure that I'm clear on this. There are 2 times during the school year that our attendance, our enrollment is looked at. And if that enrollment changes, our children leave the schools and your numbers are down, that money is actually either deducted from the next payments, where the money follows that child to that next school or that next enrollment place, or the schools or state, the school or district actually has to pay money back to the state based on the enrollment of kids in the particular school building. I just want to make sure that's clear, because I think publicly sometimes there are just so many narratives that are spoken and they're not necessarily true. But I know we've had to pay thousands back, because if a kid left our school system and went somewhere else, you're actually given a bill to pay money back from your school so that money follows that kid, even though people put children out, that is why the collection happens more than one time now, to make sure schools do not hold on to funding. Is this not correct anymore?
No, you are right. In other words, through the MFP adjustments, we call them the mid-year adjustments, we take account in October, and we first compare that to the prior year on a student-by-student basis. We then also look from October to the February count. If the counts go up and down, we adjust both ways. There was a time many, many years ago where we only adjusted upward, but it's been in place probably more than a dozen, almost 15 years now, where we look both ways. And so that allows the money to follow the students. We also have audit protocols in place where we take samples and run reports with exceptions, where we look at specific students. We question their attendance, and we look at records down to their attendance to make sure that they were there, and if they were not actually in the seat on the count day, we will then look a week before and a week after to make sure that the attendance policies of that school system or school are being followed. If they had an excused absence that day, then it's fine, but we do go to great lengths to make sure that that money follows the student.
And another thing, and again, I don't agree with this, even in the start of the school year, if your numbers are up, schools are now waiting, we're not getting the new money in October, we're actually waiting until that February count to make sure those kids stay in those buildings to receive the monies. If you're, like our count went up 100 kids, we had to operate on 400 kids versus the 500, just because the state wanted to assure that the actual IDs matched the children in our school buildings. Is this still happening?
Yes, that is correct. We are being very careful with
Yeah, y'all are
regards.
getting very tight on
Right.
funding.
And to answer your question,
Yeah, it's very tight.
I think that this body should actually look at the information that the school districts are providing. If you want to look at my child's record, for example, him along with a lot of other kids with disabilities, they went back and they changed the information as it relates to attendance and said that it was extenuating, so that they can actually receive the money. But the child never entered into the building. So they actually received funding for a child being in a building that he never stepped foot in. And so, and that's because they went back and they backdated the information in the record saying extenuating. There's other cases like ours that have actually been appearing into the courthouse as we speak, for children with disabilities where it is the same situation. And so I do think that it needs to be a more,
Maybe audited
a better audited, a real audit, instead of allowing the schools to self-report. But it also needs to be a real true accountability process, where there is a penalty for the school systems that are falsifying these documents, that is coming towards Louisiana Department of Education, considering that Louisiana Department of Education is the governing body for all of the local educational agencies. And so when situations like this occur, then me and my big mouth have to go to the legislative body and actually speak about it and provide them with the actual facts from school systems like East Baton Rouge Parish School System, which is your second largest school district in the state, that is not providing our children with disabilities a free, appropriate public education. IDEA Charter was another one. And I can continue to go on and on about the different schools that have falsified the documentation, but that is also receiving monies that are not educating our children, that is now called misappropriation and malfeasance of federal funding.
Thank you, Ms. Corley. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much, and I look forward to speaking on 4.4 and the rest of your committees.
Mr. Morris?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you. I did want to make one comment. I heard a remark with regard to connectivity and broadband concerns. And I know I attended a press conference yesterday with the governor reported out with regard to the status in Louisiana. I know the state superintendent was there as well. So I'd ask the state superintendent maybe to share with us what he heard at the press conference with regard to Louisiana's implementation nationally, how it compares to other states, and then also ask the superintendent to remind or inform this board that Bessie actually worked with the department to provide the seed money to establish the Governor's Office of Broadband Development, something along the lines of $1 million. So if you could, Superintendent, help us to appreciate some of that background.
Yes, sir, that is true. We have a very successful broadband office in the state of Louisiana. It has received national acclaim for their work in providing additional access, particularly in rural communities. And yesterday, Mr. Morris and myself attended an event in the governor's office where additional funding of federal dollars is being made available to Louisiana to further expand access across the state. One of the things I heard during the conversation that I think is especially important is around the mapping issue of better understanding down to that street and residence level, the access availability to internet as well as other public work services. So there's a conversation happening there around mapping, which I think is really important. We may have, many of us may have experienced a situation where you had to have some form of public work service completed or utility service, and in the process of an electrical company or a telephone company putting in a line, they might, for instance, cut an electrical line or break a water line. So there's work, I think, happening too around that with this process. But also to Mr. Morris's point, we were, as an agency and this board, really out front on this issue. The first broadband office in the state of Louisiana that began very shortly after the beginning of the pandemic, and Ms. Holloway, Mr. Morris, and Mr. Castile, you're very aware of this. We used some of our first dollars from the federal government for COVID to seed the broadband office in the state of Louisiana. And so we financed that in upwards of $1 million, because what we knew is if we could develop the infrastructure here in our state, we would be better positioned to compete for those federal dollars because we would be able to demonstrate to those reviewers of applications that we already had the infrastructure in place to accept those federal dollars and make sure it was utilized efficiently and effectively. And so I want to again commend the board, those of you who are returning, who were on the previous board, for your work in supporting the seed of that office. But also there will be opportunities as Gumbo 2.0 rolls out, which is this program for you and your local communities to be engaged with hospitals and municipalities and service providers to make sure that this is, these funds are flowing effectively and that they are expanding access both in urban but in rural areas as well.
Ms. Holloway.
I'm sorry, but can I know why are we talking about broadband and it's the ESA item?
Yeah, I was, I didn't want to interject, but.
Yeah, I'm happy to respond to that. I was responding to a comment that the previous, was made at the table just previously with the concern to connectivity across the state and particularly with the constituent and her child. So I was responding to her concern.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to approve 4.3. Any objections? Hearing none, motion passes. Next item.
On page 85, item 4.4, consideration of federal and state grants and allocations to LEAs, Type 2 charters, Type 5 charters, approved non-public schools, and community-based organizations, competitive and other. The recommendation is to approve.
So here a motion. Ms. Holloway, second. Mr. Harris. Any questions, comments from the board? 4.4. Hearing none, we have two people want to speak. Again, Ms. Conley from Louisiana First, Children with Disability, and Joellen Freeman, Academy of Collaborative Educators. Corley. I said Conley again? Sorry. Corley, sorry. That's all right. I'm correct every time. Well, I should have had my glasses on.
Dr. Brumley and Bessie members, my name is Jo Ellen Freeman. I am the Executive Director of the Academy of Collaborative Education, known as ACE. ACE was approved by this board last year in October for a Type 2 charter. And my co-founder and I, Maddie Cannon, would like to thank this board for all of the work that went into that. And Matt Johnson, the Charter Authorization Board, we really do appreciate the opportunity to open to our students this year. We'd also like to thank you for the recommendation that is given to you today for us to receive CSP money for our school, and what a change that will make to our students in the areas of technology, teacher professional development. Many of our teachers do not receive the professional development for children on the autism spectrum as they should. And with what we have planned already, this award would help us continue that professional development in a way that's not been seen in the state before. It also will help us in the area of STEM and technology for our children, which has to be adapted for our children. STEM programs are not adapted for kids on the autism spectrum who are impacted by their disability, and this award and offer goes a long way to do that. We just wanted to stand before you today and thank you for that we know we were recommended for this award, and we appreciate your consideration for that.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Corley.
How you doing? Karonda Corley, parent and global advocate for people with disabilities. This is my son again, Corinth Corley, future self-advocate in the making. And like she just spoke, one of his medical diagnoses is autism. So as you see see how he behaved today, you see a reason for why we should have more supports for our staff that work with children with disabilities, including those that are severe and profound that may have CVI, known as cortical visual impairment. Our staff is not receiving the training that they should, and unfortunately, Let Teachers Teach presented an actual document that does not talk about the adequate supports, such as ABA, that the staff can receive so that our children can actually be in a school room and actually receive instructional minutes as spelled out in their individualized education plan, so that they can receive free appropriate public education in so many bodies, such as the traditional school system and charters, not receive lawsuits under Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, Section 504 Rehabilitation Act, or American Disabilities Act, or the Civil Rights Act. So I really and truly encourage that you do make it very visible so that everyone in the public can actually see what the grant allocation will be used for, because during this legislative session, there was a law that passed that said that they do not have to take certain children with disabilities or children in certain communities, such as those that are socioeconomic disadvantaged. And so I encourage you to look at the Civil Rights Act and look at what discrimination is defined as. Because this here, if you do not make it your due diligence to seek encouragement and seek actual guidance from the legislators as it relates to that specific law, then you will be faced with lawsuits. And for those individuals with disabilities, they can actually pursue litigation against governing entities and individuals individually. And so that I do yield my time, 2 minutes, 37 seconds, for any questions, comments, and concerns. But I also look forward to speaking on more agenda items on your committee today, since I was not afforded my accommodations being a person with a disability myself. Thank you. Did you have something you wanted to say, son? Tell them thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Corley. Any questions or comments from the board?
Mr. Burton, I just want to point out that we're really excited about ACE and what they're going to bring to the Northeast Louisiana region. It is a unique opportunity to launch a school to serve students who need this particular support. We're really excited about it. These $2 million of launch funds will help them on professional development for ABA therapies in the school. It's going to help them with increasing campus safety and security measures, and as well as just continuing to train their staff on meeting the needs of students on the spectrum. So I just want to say thank you for the heart that you have for the work, and that we're all really counting on you to make sure that you do this
Come to Northeast
well.
Louisiana.
That's right.
Our doors are open.
And thank you, Dr. Brumley, for mentioning that. Autism is a mental health diagnosis spelled out in the DSM-5, the diagnostical statistical manual for doctors to actually diagnose them. And that fell up under House Bill 846. I forgot what law it is now, that says that all monies that are used for individuals with mental health or behavioral health, that you have to send that report to the Division of Administration. And so I look forward to reading that information that you submit to the Division of Administration as it relates to this school or any other school system that is receiving any grant funding, federal or state funding for individuals with disabilities that have a diagnosis of mental health or behavioral health.
Thank you. So, item 4.4, we have a motion and a second. Are there any objections? Seeing none, motion passes. Next item.
On page 107, item 5.1, consideration of 8G funding cycle activities, approval of 8G statewide programs for fiscal year 2024, 2025. Recommendation is to approve the program.
We have a motion. Ms. Holloway. No, Ms. Champagne, sorry. Second, Dr. Armstrong. Any objections? Motion passes. Next item.
On page 115, item 7.1, consideration of legislative reports. The recommendation is to receive the reports as outlined.
Is there a motion? Dr. Armstrong. Second, Ms. Champagne. Any question, comments from the board? We do have one card on this. Richard Baker, PhD, Louisiana Federation of Teachers, wishes to speak, supports the recommendation.
Good morning. Richard Baker, Louisiana Federation of Teachers and School Employees. The LFT applauds the results of this report, specifically the Expanded Academic Support Report. It clearly demonstrates that when public school students who are academically behind receive additional supports, they do better. This is the opposite of doing more with less. This is using more to do more for those who have less. The report says the 2023 performance scores for Louisiana's public schools and systems results show that statewide school performance score exceeds pre-pandemic levels following 2 consecutive years of growth. Louisiana students improved their reading scores by 10 percentage points this last academic year. The assessments, which increase in difficulty from beginning to end, provide teachers with data to support students. Louisiana has made considerable progress. Louisiana is one of only 3 states where average reading achievement in 2023 surpassed pre-pandemic levels. Such positive progress demonstrates the resilience of educators, their ability to conquer any barriers, and their dedication to exceptional quality teaching and learning. Collective dedication to fundamentals like reading and math, supporting educators, and empowering parents helped pave the way for Louisiana to rebound quickly from unprecedented challenges. There are 7 links to positive news stories and press releases in this section of the report. Data doesn't develop itself. Computers don't inspire, and programs don't guide. Teachers and school employees are committed to the education of the students. They do what is required of them. They sacrifice time outside of work hours to prepare activities, score student work, and tutor students. In the last decade, teachers received less than $4,000 in raises in the MFP and support staff less than half that. Yet despite a crushing workload, Louisiana educators were instrumental in securing the state's highest recorded ranking on the nation's report card, helped secure the state's highest recorded PK-12 rankings according to U.S. News and World Report, and worked to increase school performance scores to exceed pre-pandemic levels. There are about 50,000 teachers who deserve the respect earned by ensuring continuous improvement every day, every class. It is said that teachers must earn a raise, which is to say nothing of a cost of living adjustment. This report is wonderful news and should be an exhibit in why those who dedicate themselves to serving their communities have earned a raise. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Baker. Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, motion to approve 7.1. We already have that, I'm sorry. Any objections? Seeing none, next item, please.
On page 232, item 7.2, consideration of an update report regarding the Louisiana 2024 regular legislative session implementation plan. Recommendation is to receive the report.
Have a motion? Mr. Harris. Second? Mr. Castillo. Any questions, comments from the board? We have one card. Ms. Corley, Louisiana Families of Disabilities, of Children with Disabilities.
I don't think I need to reintroduce myself or my son, and my son is getting very acquainted with your building right now, with this room like he would in his classroom if he was there. I think that it's very important that we be very open with the public and inform them that that some of the individuals from this body will actually be at the House Education Committee on September 3rd in regards to what implementation of legislation that passed into this regular 2024 session is going to look like. I myself am very much intrigued and will be there so that I can hold this body's feet to the fire, because so many times bills are passed into law and this body fails to implement and ensure that the local educational agencies implement them for children, such as my son, who's back there having fun dancing to whatever he's watching on YouTube. I think that it's extremely important that we talk about what is going to look like. I know today this body is supposed to actually spell out what implementation of the bill that became law that was signed by 28 legislators for ABA, making sure that those that have it as a medical necessity can actually receive ABA in the classroom so that the teachers can teach, like they said in the report, but also children can learn, which is what is important. Because if children are not in the building, then there is no reason for a staff member to receive a raise. Let me say that again. If children are not in the building, in a classroom, there is no reason for any staff member in a school system, charter or private parochial, to receive a raise, because that means they're not teaching anyone. And so I think that it is important that we focus on what educating all children, including the children with IEPs, those with 504s, those that have any type of mental challenges, emotional disturbance, all children be afforded a free, appropriate public education. This world that we live in is not segregated. This is not the 40s or the 50s, and it's not going back. I'm sorry for Project 2025, but it's not. And so I do say that we need to be very honest about upholding the laws that have passed and implementing them to the best of our ability. I'm not asking for you to implement them to the standards of a Rolls Royce or a Maserati or a Lamborghini, but to the standards of a Toyota Avalon or a Corolla or maybe even a 4Runner. I'm just asking for the children to get appropriate education, not the best, just appropriate, so that they can have the fundamentals and the foundation so that they can become productive citizens just like each and every last one of you. And so I encourage you to actually implement, and y'all so great at creating teams like the one that you did with LTT. Let's create a team or a task force or a work group where you have people like myself at the table that is very well versed in those laws that can ensure that you don't violate any of the federals so that you are not sitting there as a defendant trying to say why you should not be paying a family like mine. I yield, and any questions, comments, or concerns you have, I am here all day, even if that means that we're here till 8:00 p.m. like we've been before. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Corley. Questions, comments from the board? We have a motion, second, item 7.2. Any objections? Hearing none, motion passes. Next item.
On page 241, item 8.1, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 1929, Louisiana Accounting and Uniform Governmental Handbook in response to legislation of the 2024 regular legislative session. Recommendation is to approve as a notice of intent.
Motion. Mr. Morris, second. Mr. Harris. Any discussion? Any objections? Seeing none, motion passes. Next item.
On page 243, item 8.2, consideration of revisions to bulletins in response to Act 393 of the 2023 regular legislative session and advisory group membership. Recommendation is to approve as a notice of intent.
We have a motion. Dr. Clark? Ms. Champagne? Any questions, comments for the board? We have one card. Ms. Corley, you're back up.
Thank you. And your Wi-Fi is not working very well today. My child is having problems dealing with the Wi-Fi right now. Act 393 is in regards to the open meeting law changes that would afford individuals with disabilities such as my child and myself to actually be able to have meaningful participation virtually. That's something that that was passed in 2023 and it's 2024, and this body has yet to implement it. Today, Mr., I don't want to assassinate his name, but I'm going to say his last name is Mr. Walker. I couldn't pronounce his first name. Start with a T. I could spell it. Him and Mr. Colbert, or I think that's how you pronounce Kevin. I think his last name is pronounced Colbert. The two individuals today provided me with a link to be able to participate in this body's agenda and do public comment virtually as spelled out in this law. And I was not able to do that, which is why I am here in the living flesh. I probably would have did you a great justice if I'd have been virtual, because I might not have would have spoke as much. But considering I had to drive here from my home, which is in another parish, I made it my business to be very vocal. And so being very vocal meant that I am supposed to have that meaningful participation where I can actually state what is really the issue and how we as individuals with disabilities fail to be able to be engaged and have our voices heard. Sometimes when we're watching virtually, we cannot necessarily see that is projected on the screen due to the lighting. I myself with visual impairment, i.e. by the glasses, your light refracts and it actually casts a glare in my eyes and can cause me to have severe migraines, which are very troubling, which also causes my blood pressure to elevate to alarming standards. In addition to that, you have people with disabilities such as my child who have sensory processing as one of his diagnoses, who is not, who has a problem with being around large crowds like this, especially after he watched his mother be illegally arrested and imprisoned by trying to attend an open meeting to speak about him not receiving special transportation to go to school. Again, these things can be prevented and could have been prevented. We're supposed to have a sign language interpreter. My child's first language is American Sign Language, yet we don't have it. These are things that would be accessible to us if we had that virtual platform like we have requested per law that passed in 2023. This is when Vice President Lance Harris was then the chair of House Education Committee, and he knows me very well and knows that I speak from the heart about making sure our families can have it. But it also benefits people that are retired educators that cannot physically come up the stairs or come up the ramp to come into this building to matriculate into this room that does not have a push button to open the door, so that them in their wheelchair or them and the nice little crutches they may have or the 4-point walker can actually make it through the door, because it is not in ADA compliance and it's not beneficial for them. So when you do that, and we're talking about an educational shortage of staff that can educate children like my child, you're missing the buck by not implementing this law to its fullest potential. It would be very, very informative. And there are a lot of staff that have retired that would love to go in a classroom to work with children like mine, if they can actually participate and have meaningful participation and public comment electronically. And so I ask that you do that, but also that you have the translation for those that are English language learners, where Dr. Cade Brumley was formerly the superintendent, Jefferson Parish. They have a large population of individuals that are English language learners, and they are the largest school system for this state. And so I think that if we look at the complexities of our populations of students and people that we have to deal with and interact with every single day, that we can make sure that every voice will matter and every child can actually be educated. And so I strongly encourage that you implement this law to the fullest extent possible for every work group, every task force, every commission, every committee, as well as this particular body and your board retreat that you had on yesterday. That fell up under open meeting law. And so our public should be able to participate to the fullest extent possible, but also give public comment. And so if there's any questions, comments, or concerns, I actually will answer them. And I would like to thank former Representative Stefanski, who actually made sure that people with disabilities was at the forefront with this.
Thank you, Ms. Corley. Questions or comments from Ms. Corley?
Not a comment from Ms. Corley. We have the opportunity, good opportunity to speak from time to time. It's not for you today, Ms. Corley, but I would like the board to know that in 2023, the department, along with some Bessie staff, did develop guidance, and our staff went through a training on this. We have not had any requests at any of our advisory meetings for remote participation, but I would not be privy to if there have been requests coming into Bessie, and Mr. Walker, certainly you would not at this point either around this particular meeting. But certainly I agree with Ms. Corley, we need to make sure that we're watching this moving forward.
And as you said, Dr. Brumley, I actually sent the email to Mr. Harris and Mr. Morris this morning, as well as to Mr. Walker and to Mr. Colbert, along with the legislators, informing them that the link stopped working as it came to addressing the agenda for individuals with disabilities. And it so wonderfully started working after that committee had made its decisions. And so I do think that it is problematic, or maybe it was purposeful. I'm not sure. But I leave that up to your IT people to figure that out. But I do think that it is important that we make it to, that it should not be that we have to request anything. I don't have to request Walmart to be in ADA compliance. I don't have to request for a school system to be in ADA compliance. As long as you are receiving Title II funding, that is legally your responsibility. And so I encourage you all to look at those federal laws, or stop receiving the money so that you don't have to hear my mouth. But as long as you receive Title II funding, you legally have to implement that, and nobody with a disability have to make any of those requests.
Thank you, ma'am. Just as a point, the meeting yesterday, which was supposed to be a retreat, that had been rescheduled, and we have and did follow all the open meeting laws with that as well. That is being rescheduled for September. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to just speak to that briefly. Our new BESI Executive Director, Mr. Walker, will be reaching out to board members to see what your schedule allows for the retreat that we plan for September. And then also want to mention that one of the items on the agenda for the retreat is to address the communication system in the building. And that would include live streaming and accessibility and so forth. So that is on the agenda. It is something that will be addressed at the retreat. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? We have a motion and a second, 8.2. Any objection? Hearing none, motion passes. Next item.
That concludes your agenda.
Motion to adjourn.